Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night. That means it's your chance to ask me any question to help you on your property development journey, and you do so by clicking on the link below, propdev.info/open-mic, and we're going to do absolutely everything humanly possible to help you on your property development journey. Now, by submitting your questions early, it gives me a little bit of chance to do my research and homework to try and help you along the way. So that said, we've got a ton of questions to come your way today. Very first question comes from Yono. Now, Yono has a very, very long question, so forgive me as I go through this. Firstly, they say, hi, Rob, it was my first time attending your monthly meetups in a number of years. I find these sessions incredibly valuable and just wanted to thank you and your team for all the effort you put into organising the monthly event. It's greatly appreciated. I do have a quick question that I wanted your thoughts on, and then goes on to give me a less than quick question. My business partner and I have completed a few projects now, and with margins getting tighter in metro areas, we've started looking at regional opportunities. We've recently purchased a site in Horsham and have been granted a planning permit to knock down the existing dwelling and build 4 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom units. Our conservative estimate for resale, selling as standard residential units, is around $400K each. However, a local agent we've been working with has suggested that if we fully furnish the units and offer them as serviced apartments, where the landlord covers electricity, gardening, cleaning, furnishings, etc., we could potentially achieve rental yields of somewhere between $700 and $800 per week. Based on that income, the agent believes investor buyers could pay $500K per unit, basing the valuation of the property solely on the yield potential. Given the low vacancy rate, solid rental employment, and forecast growth in the area, we believe rental demand will remain strong. That said, there aren't really any comparables to justify the $500K price point. So I wanted to ask, do you think this figure is realistic based on yield, or do you feel the agent might be overly optimistic? Any insights would be greatly appreciated, Yono. So firstly, Yono, congratulations on having completed a number of projects. That is great work. There's a couple of elements here that I want to touch on. Firstly, the fact that you're doing deals in regional areas means that your growth in the areas, I guess based on population and demand, is going to be much, much lower than in typical metro areas. For that reason, your margin for error is very skinny. So if you get the perfect product and it gets taken up, great, you're going to make some great money. But if you get a slightly imperfect product and it's something that is not quite right, then there might be a chance, because of the lack of demand, that there might not be anyone to actually take up that yield. So whilst you're contemplating the extra uplift, I would be extraordinarily cautious to make sure that the original plan of just selling it as is actually makes sense, and that you can go back to that without too much impact, should that be the case. Now, in essence, what you're really doing from how you've described it is you're going to provide all the furnishings and you're going to provide it as a serviced product, being that you're going to pay the electricity. They pay a single fee in that. Now, that tends to infer that they are more shorter term accommodation rather than longer term. Not always the case, but often the case. One of the things that I would be doing is putting some ads up just to see whether or not rental demand would work. So put that up on rent.com.au and just see whether or not there's anyone actually interested in paying that sort of rental yield in the area. That's probably a first start. And then I guess you've got to look at the fact that this is also being in Horsham. I'm not I guess an area expert by any instance, but my understanding is that there'd be a lot of I guess tourist type accommodation there, so shorter stay accommodation. So it is a higher risk play, and if you're going to do a serviced apartment type process, you're going to limit the number of people that you're actually going to be selling it to, because you're going to have to provide services like I guess regular cleaning and linen, so almost like a miniature Airbnb by the sound of it, but it really depends on whether or not they're short stay or longer stay, and that part wasn't really clear in what you're saying. Given the limited number of people in the area from a population perspective, my concern would be that you aren't quite going to get the outcome that you're looking for. So please make sure that you are making sure that your original plan of the selling the units as is still makes sense. And if you go and fully furnish them and try to service them and you can't sell them, that you actually have a fallback position and that you can actually afford to hold them should they not sell. So you need to be able to have a plan A and a plan B. Unfortunately, because there is no comparables, the only thing you can really do is put some ads on and see whether or not anyone bites, see if there's anyone interested in that. That's pretty much all I could suggest. My bigger piece of advice, though, regional, whilst it can make money, has a higher risk, I guess, because of the limited number of, the limited amount of demand in the area. So my caution would be, if going into regional areas, to put as much homework as you can into it. Challenge, when you don't have comparables, you are the market maker, and as the market maker, that means you are taking an incredible amount of risk. So make sure that you've got some deep pockets to understand the impact and be able to absorb the impact should that be the case. Hope that helps. I know it wasn't a huge amount of insights, but hopefully it gives you something. Next question from Daryl. Daryl's actually got two questions. Question number one, and in this instance, he's trying to ask for some advice on entities and structuring. So I might not be able to give you all the insights that you want here, Daryl, given that I'm not legally allowed to give this sort of advice. But I'm going to do the question anyway, just so that everyone understands. In Queensland, I should say, a trust having a land tax threshold of 350K before paying land tax. When buying a property under a company, under a company trustee. I'm going to ask that question again because it's poorly worded. In Queensland, trusts have a land tax threshold of 350K before they have to pay land tax if they have a corporate trustee. Can you buy it under 3 or 4 different trusts with the same trustee in order to minimize the land tax? I.e., would you get 4 times the 350K threshold if 4 entities or 4 trusts were actually the owner of the property? If this way, the UCV would be split 4 ways, lowering your ownership value in each trust. Does it have to be a separate company for each trust to take advantage of this? So as I touched on before, Daryl, unfortunately, this is an accounting problem. So you are going to need to speak to your accountant with regards to this. What I can tell you is my understanding and the questions to actually ask your accountant, but I can't give you advice in any way, shape or form. So my understanding is that in Queensland, that threshold that you refer to, the 350K, is with regards to the trustee, not the trust. And so if the trustee is sitting across multiple trusts, then you only get one threshold. And so if you're trying to do that with many, many trusts, then you would need a individual trustee for each one of them. Now, I have seen people attempt to do this before and minimize their land tax. It does cause other complications with regards to funding and a whole bunch of other things like that. So just because you might be able to reduce your land tax doesn't mean you're going to make your the ownership structure, an easy one to actually deal with, because it might actually complicate other parts of your life. So I would be speaking to an accountant to make sure that you've got your tax minimization side of things. I'd also be talking to a funder to make sure that you can actually get that across the line. Next one, he's got another question from Daryl. Says, in Queensland, a company and trust structure can hold the property into the future, and another company and trust structure could do the development works. Can a different company and trust structure complete the development works, claim the GST, and then pass on the charge to the owner of the property, that is the company and trust structure, in order to minimize the land tax, in order to minimize the risk of the owner of a property having not completed the works themselves? Or is there a better way to structure this? Okay, so firstly, I just want to make sure I understand your question, Daryl, because that's quite a complicated scenario. It really comes down to what you're trying to do from an end goal, and you've not really said what your end goal is here. But what it sounds like is you want to have one entity that owns the dwelling, another entity that does the development. This entity takes the risk and charges the ultimate buyer and claims all the GST imputation credits. And this entity doesn't actually do any of the development per se. That's kind of how it sounds like you're actually saying that. Now, it is possible to put structures like that together, but there would have to be some sort of development management agreement sitting between them, and likely a sale between this entity and that entity at some point in the process, because otherwise this entity is the one that's actually doing the sale. So this entity is the one that takes the ongoing liability of the risk of selling the finished product. So it's a tricky one, my friend. This is both a combination of asset protection and also a combination of tax minimization. So you will need to get your accountant and your lawyer into the room at the same time and run this scenario past them. Now, that said, I do know that what you're trying to achieve is actually possible, but it really comes down to what is the end goal. Is the end goal to keep some stock in the first entity, or is the end goal to get rid of everything? So if you understand what your end goal is, the end should always inform how you actually go into the structure in the first place. And so in talking to your accountant and your solicitor, make sure you're very, very clear. Are you going to keep one? Are you going to keep none? Are you going to keep all? How does that actually start to look? Because that has some huge impacts on the structuring that you put together. Unfortunately, can't give you actual advice, but I would be getting the two of those people in the room at the same time. Next question comes from Kamal. Kamal says, I would like to start a small development in Melbourne and currently live in Geelong. I'm struggling on how to find a small land and validate its profits and return on investment. Kamal, that is a huge question. And so I'm going to have to take it back to the basics, because you've basically said, hey, how do I do everything? So the first thing I'm going to say is you really, really, really need to understand, firstly, what development strategy that you're wanting to do, and also, I guess, where does that development strategy start to make sense? Now, my guidance to you on that, once you've actually understood the development strategy, each council that you're actually going to do that will then have a different set of rules for that. So the amount of land that you'll need, the amount of zoning and frontage and all those sorts of things will be very, very different. And so there's a whole bunch of work that you need to do to become a strategy expert and an area expert, to then find an area where you can then know the numbers really, really well, to then work out what you're actually trying to do. Now, my strong encouragement here would be to go and do our free course. We have a free course, and see if I can find a link to our free course. Here we go. So go do the free course. It'll give you some insights into what it will actually take to actually try and work out that. You want to find areas where the deals actually start to make sense. By reverse engineering, you need to find out what is the median house price of the developable site. Now, developable site means the zoning, the land size, the frontage, and also that there's no intrinsic value on the property, and that's one that people forget. And so you need to do a whole bunch of work to understand what is possible. And there will be areas where there's too many houses with too much intrinsic value, and so you'll struggle to actually find deals. So you need to understand how to do that. Do that 7-step formula to financial freedom. That'll give you some really good insights into how to start your journey. The other thing I would say, you're based in Victoria, come to our monthly meetups. My friend, we run meetups all the way around the country: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. In Melbourne, we run them on the first Saturday of every month. So as a matter of fact, by the time you're actually watching this, we will have just had our 13th birthday event in Melbourne, I guess this weekend. So but first Saturday of every month in Melbourne. Then the second Saturday is in Sydney. The third Saturday is in Brisbane. The fourth Saturday is in Adelaide. And then we repeat the cycle. So I guess would love to see you at one of those meetups. Come and hang around, see people actually doing this, understand what it actually takes to do a feasibility, how to determine areas where there's lots of demand, lots of opportunity, evidence of other people doing it, proof that those people are profitable, and enough demand that you can actually do the same. That's really what we're trying to teach you in this cycle, mate. And hopefully we get to see you at our 13th birthday event, which we've got all the way around the country happening this month. Next question is Julie. Julie says, How do I find a JV partner that won't screw me over? Oh, Julie, this is a huge question. So firstly, there's a whole bunch of things that go into this. A JV partner, firstly, needs to be someone who complements your skills. So where you are weak, they should be strong. Where they are strong, you are weak. Okay. So now, not knowing if you want to be the money partner in the deal or whether or not you want to be, I guess, the sweat equity partner in the deal, you've got to understand what is it that you need from that other person, and more importantly, what value can you give them? And when you have a complementary set of skills, then the two of you together can do the outcomes that one of you individually can't. So they need you and you need them. That is the ideal scenario in a JV partner. Then you also want to do some personality, I guess, checks to make sure that your personality and their personality align. I personally use a personality profiling tool called DISC, D-I-S-C. It stands for dominant, influential, steady, and compliant. And so you want to understand where they sit in that matrix and where you sit in that matrix, and see whether or not you are complementary to each other in how you actually deal with and, I guess, cater for challenges and issues and those sorts of things. Then you want to make sure that you've got the same goals and objectives. If you want to do townhouses and they're doing subdivisions, that's not a good alignment, because I guess you're not going to progress your development journey in following someone else's goals. So you want to find someone doing the same thing that you want to learn how to do yourself. Okay. When you start to combine all of those elements together, then that's when you're going to start to find the right partner. Now, how do you find those people? Well, you're going to find them in all sorts of places, friends and family. You're also going to find them at meetups like our meetups all the way around the country. You're going to find them through your industry experts and those sorts of things. But it's more important that you're out there actually building networking relationships with people and actually showing people what value you are actually going to be adding to their life, and have people invite themselves into your world rather than you force yourself into theirs. Now I'm going to suggest come to our meetups. They are probably the easiest thing where you're going to start to meet people. Again, we run these all the way around the country, so I highly encourage you to come to them. You're going to find some good people that you're actually looking for. Understanding your role. Are you the sweat equity partner or are you the money partner? Now, the fact that you're saying that somebody won't screw you over sounds like you're wanting to be the money partner. My biggest advice, if you are the money partner, then you are just as responsible for the money as anyone else in the deal. It is your job to be able to assess, is the deal a deal? Okay, don't take everybody's word that it is a great deal, because I've never seen anybody asking for a money partner give you an information memorandum that says that there is no profit in the deal. They always say there's profit. So your ability to assess the deal and see whether or not there actually truly is a deal there is the most critical part. So you need to give yourself some insights into how to do that. And again, I'm going to say, come and do that free course that we offer. That will give you some insights into some of the things to actually learn in that regard. Hoping that helps, Julie. Big question, but hope to see you at one of our meetups. Next one comes from Bradley. Bradley says, just watched my first PDN webcast, which was about doing a development in a self-managed super fund. As a result, so I think what you mean is our YouTube channel. As a result, I've been in touch with the company involved, Supervest. However, I also wanted to learn about alternatives to this, as I'm getting nowhere with my advisors or my accountant. I'm sure that there must be a way to safely develop using my self-managed super fund without getting into trouble with the ATO, but I need help to navigate this. Any advice would be greatly appreciated, Brad. So Brad, doing developments in your self-managed super fund is a regulatory compliance nightmare. And so it is super important that you are engaging with your accountant in particular, and that your accountant is a specialist in self-managed super funds and also a specialist in property development. They need to be understanding both, because if they don't understand both, then they're probably not the right people to give you advice. So you've got some accountants that are great for tax, some accountants that are great for super, some that are great for business, all sorts of things like that. So you need to find one that is great for property development and self-managed super funds in particular together. When you find that guy, then they're going to give you some great insights. So now, I can't give you the advice on what to do. What I can tell you is some of the challenges that you need to overcome. So firstly, you, the human, wearing this hat, and you, the self-managed super fund, wearing this hat, you can't have, 100% control wearing the two hats. You can only have a maximum of 50% control if you are trying to wear two hats. So your self-managed super fund must engage with external entities in order to do that. And you can't control all of it if you are the self-managed super fund, if you're borrowing from yourself, okay? Equally, the self-managed super fund isn't allowed to borrow per se, or so I should have said partnering with yourself, isn't allowed to borrow to improve the value of the property. So unless the self-managed super fund has the money to do the development as cash, it can't borrow to improve the value of the property. Hence why that YouTube presentation was there, a mob called Supervest, where they found a workaround which they tested with the ATO through an ATO private ruling that basically says they themselves are doing the development and you are engaging them on your behalf as a single contract. So because otherwise it's a two-part contract and one part is you improving the value, which is not allowed. So they have managed and navigated a lot of that. Okay, the other challenges that you're going to provide, it really comes down to the fact that you A, can't borrow to improve the property, and B, you can't partner with yourself and yourself, okay? So if you're going to do anything in super, then you'll probably need to speak to your accountant about, do I partner with other people in order to actually get that across the line where they are, providing the cash input into the process. It is a very, very, very murky world. It is every single year your self-managed super fund gets audited. And so it is 1,000% critical that you are compliant, because you can and will be tested every single year. It's not about if you get an audit, you will get audited every year. That's a mandate of your self-managed super fund. So being compliant upfront is super critical. Please, Brad, make sure that you go and engage with that expert and get the best advice. Next question comes from VJ. VJ says, as a property developer who plans to hold onto the development assets, I'm looking to identify areas that offer both strong rental yields and solid long-term capital growth. What tools and data sources are available to help pinpoint such opportunities? Additionally, how can I effectively balance the search for high-performing deals with the need to select properties that will perform well over the long term? VJ, this is a really, really interesting dilemma that you're presenting here, because the mindset of an investor and the mindset of a developer are very, very different, and the markets that we're operating in have different drivers that are driving it. And so it's extraordinarily difficult to achieve what it is that you're trying to achieve as a baseline layer. Now, I think you'll achieve it through, a secondary thing. So let me try to articulate it first. And I want to give you some context here. I've done 20 years of buy and hold investing. Bought my first house at 18, first investment property at 21, owned my first house outright at 24, and I did 20 years of buy and hold before going into the property development space. So I'm very much looking at property development through the eyes of an investor with regards to trying to hold stock at the end and manufacture it. So I have been doing exactly what you're proposing for quite some time. So I'm coming to you from that context, okay? Now, through the eyes of an investor, we're looking for that long-term capital growth type objective, typically in order to grow our net wealth, or alternatively, we're looking for cash flow in order to, I guess, improve our living standards today. Okay, so it's usually an either or. It's very difficult to actually achieve both. Now, typically, that's going to be in areas where lots of people wanting to start to move to, and more specifically, have already started moving to, and we're measuring the rate that people are moving in to measure the supply and demand of the area. And as the supply and demand, as the demand goes up, then the capital growth tends to go up as well. Okay, so we're looking for those high growth areas. Now, as a property developer, we're looking for different things altogether. What we're looking for is what is missing in society. Okay, so as property developers, we are the makers of community, and we look at things like market trends and population growth and the demographics of the area, and we go, what is the product that is missing in the area? So we try to put an opportunity in front of someone before they realize that it's actually missing. So every house, every school, every road, every shopping center has been built by a developer looking at the needs of the community and putting that need in front of them first. Now, what tends to happen is the developer makes the community, and then all the population grows to come into it. So the investment side comes after. It's a secondary impact. The property development comes first. So my guidance to you would be, look at it for the property development potential first. Manufacture your profit day one. Then, as you're holding onto your asset, then you're going to measure over time whether that yield is something where that asset is giving you the kind of return you want in the longer term. It's very difficult to predict that at the start because we don't know whether everyone's going to come there at the rate that we're actually hoping that they actually would come to. But it is very easy to measure that 1 year in, 2 years in, 3 years in, and see whether or not the asset is still performing as intended. Now, if it's performing as intended, then you hold on to it. If it's not performing as intended, then you roll that asset over and I guess go and do another development, hold on to that one and see how that goes. Okay, now for me personally, what I do is every couple of months for all of the assets that I am holding, I ask myself 3 questions. Question number 1, is the asset performing as intended? So if I'm looking for capital growth, is it giving me capital growth? If I'm looking for cash flow, is it giving me cash flow? Question number 2, what is the likelihood it will continue to perform as intended? Now, noting that we go through cycles and there are times when we're going to get huge capital growth and then we're going to flatline for a while. So I want to ride that capital growth, and when it starts to flatline, then the next and the money stops working as hard for me. Then I start to ask myself with question number 3, which is, with what I know now, can I do better with the money? And so that's really what I'm suggesting to you, is to say, if you go through and ask yourself those 3 questions every couple of months for any asset that you're holding at the end of a development cycle, then you can say, am I getting the capital growth I'm getting out of it, or that I want to get out of it? Am I getting the cash flow that I want to get out of those deals? When I understand those elements, then and only then do I determine if I want to keep that from a long-term perspective. Anyway, hope that helps, Vijay. Next one is Andre. Andre says, hi, Rob. How does mezzanine finance work in regards to progress payments? Let's assume I have a senior lender covering 65% of my total development costs, 20% from a mezzanine lender, and 15% cash in a deal. Does the senior lender only release 65% of the costs of each progress payment? Does the mezzanine lender also release in progress payments, or is that loan expected to be taken as a lump sum at the start of the deal? As you can appreciate, the total interest costs are drastically affected depending upon when the expensive mezzanine debt is drawn down. Please help this newbie understand. Andre, really good question, mate. And I'm just going to try and help everybody else to actually understand what mezzanine lending is before actually going and answering your question, just so that we can bring everyone along on the journey. Now, in a residential world, we are used to a thing called deposit and a thing called the loan. In a commercial sense, those things are still the same thing, but the terminology changes. So a deposit becomes equity, and the loan becomes debt. Okay, and so as we start to talk about I guess the commercial lending side of things, typically in a commercial loan, and as you've touched on in your instance, they would lend 65% of the total development cost. And so that would be, I guess, the debt component, which then gives you a shortfall in order to actually get across the line. So you've suggested that you're going to get 20% from a mezzanine lender. Now, the mezzanine lender is effectively lending you the equity, or what in a residential world we would have thought as deposit. Okay, now which means that if I think of the amount, it's called a capital stack. So we've got our senior lender here, then we've got a mezzanine lender, then we've got your cash coming in, and then after that we've got the profit that might be in the deal. So the higher up the stack you are, the closer you are to the risk. Okay, so the mezzanine lender being in that equity space, if the deal doesn't make profit, then you, as the investor who's put 15% in, would lose your capital. And then the mezzanine lender starts to get exposed to the risk really, really high. So their rates are typically going to be much higher than the senior debt, which would be a much lower interest rate and typically first mortgage backed security. Now, for those reasons, the senior lender wants the equity spent before their money is spent. Okay, so typically you'll find that your cash, your personal cash, and also the mezzanine lender's cash would actually be spent as that lump sum, as you're actually talking about upfront to actually, so it's not like a drawdown type scenario as what you're talking about, but rather they need to see that cash is actually there in order for them to even consider taking on the loan at all. So if you don't have that cash available at hand, then that's not going to be deemed that the senior lender will actually come into the deal. So when you actually think about it from that side, the mezzanine lender is really going to be drawn down for the entire duration of the project. Hoping that helps to understand that situation, mate. Next question, Jesse. Jesse says, as a beginner developer, one of the first things you learn is that you generally need to start by doing a 1-into-2 development to start building cash to move into larger projects. However, with the low or no money down strategies, what is to stop me from going straight into larger developments, say a 1-into-3 or a 1-into-6, if the numbers stack up? Given that a 1-into-2 in my city appears to have very thin margins, would it not be better to chase higher returns on a larger project? So Jesse, look, there's elements of truth in what you're saying. There's also elements of risk here, and I want to I guess flesh this out. So irrespective of what your development strategy is, if you're going to do a smaller project, then the amount is going to be smaller. The amount of risk that you're doing is relatively smaller, and you can learn in that process without risking anywhere near as much money. Okay, if you're going straight into a larger deal, then there's a lot more money in, and you're learning as you go. And so the order of magnitude of any mistake that you're going to have is going to have a significantly larger impact on the profitability of your deal. By far the biggest risk is your ability to read the market and actually understand whether the supply and demand dynamics are actually there for your particular deal. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Now, for anyone who's been following me for a while, you'll understand that I teach a methodology in how to read the market where you'll understand that there is a development cycle that looks a lot like a bell curve that says whether or not there is, I guess, demand and in the area, and whether or not there's activity in the area, and where in that bell curve are you actually sitting. Okay, so very, very basically, no developments are happening. One person steps in. That person is the market maker. There's no evidence of them, anyone having done the deal before. That person doesn't know the price point. That person's taking a lot of risk. Okay, then as you step up, the next person watches the market maker and says, hey, one is not a trend, but I'm skilled enough to actually see that what they did is merit. So these guys are called the early adopters. The early adopters are following the footsteps of the previous person because they can see some evidence. And then you start to get into the point where Joe Public sees all of that happening. So the early adopters are typically where I would like you as a beginner to actually be stepping in. Okay. Now that means that if you can see the early adopters doing it, and ideally we want to see in the vicinity of about 10 people doing a project in an area before us, that will give us the confidence levels that the numbers and the price points actually work. Okay. Now the challenge that you've got if you go into a larger deal is, firstly, there is less amounts of land of that size. So if you're doing a 1:6, there's less 1:6 than there is a 1:2. Okay, so, and because there's less of it, there's going to be less evidence of those turning over, less evidence, less people with enough money to buy that, less people with enough skills to run that deal. So you are more likely to be a market maker in the 1:6 than you would be in a 1:2. So your ability to read the market and go, where am I in that cycle, is much higher on the larger deal. Okay. Now, what you want to do is you want to cut your teeth on a smaller deal so that you can learn how to read that market and see those trends. You can see the market maker getting in. You can see the early adopter getting in. You can see what those patterns and dynamics are. And that way, when you step up a deal size, you will become the early adopter. And then when you step up another deal size, you eventually become the market maker. The challenge with what you're talking about here, though, is on deal number one, you want to be the market maker. Now, if you're going in to be the market maker on deal number one, that makes it extraordinarily risky because you don't have the evidence of what that sale price might be in the finished product, because there'd be very few people having transacted that particular deal. So please, my friend, be very, very cautious in taking on a deal of that size. The actual running of the deal part, though, Jesse, I tend to agree. A 1:2 and a 1:4 or a 1:6, the running of the deal is very, very similar. Okay, you're pretty much doing the same tasks, the same activities, the same timelines, and those sorts of things. But it's picking the deal and where in the market cycle you are, where the true risk is. And so that's where I would encourage you to be extraordinarily cautious. Next question comes from Ruben. Ruben says, what is the cost of membership, please? What are the benefits? Cheers, Ruben. So I think what you're referring to, mate, is our annual membership. And if you come to our Property Developer Network shop, it is $250 a year to become a member. That allows you to turn up to every physical event in your city, of which we run an event every single month, with the exception of December New Year crossover period. So 11 physical events a year, but you also get to dial into 45 events all the way around the country. So you could live in Sydney and dial into the Melbourne event and dial into the Adelaide and Brisbane event as well. So we run an event, 45 events a year. So you could dial into that for that same $250. Plus you get all the recordings of everything we've ever done. So you can actually go back and watch replays. You can see real deals. You can engage with industry experts and that sort of thing. And we've been running this community for 13 plus years. Plus you get all of the discounts that we have negotiated because of our bulk purchasing power of our community. So very, very worthwhile to actually become an annual member and get involved. Okay, next question comes from, I hope I can say this right, Athathan. Can you build a 60 square meter 2-bedroom granny flat for $150K in Central Coast Woy Woy? Please let me know. So Athathan, it is possible to build I guess at that price point, but it's going to be a very, very budgety build and more likely to be a prefabricated home that is actually built in a factory and actually shipped to site, rather than something that is actually going to be built on premise. But it is possible to actually do that. So what they would call a relocatable home. Firstly, you want to make sure that that you've got access into your property in order to do that. They'll quite often have to bring that in on the back of a truck and with a crane in order to do that. But there are plenty of companies that will actually supply for in and around that price point. But if you're trying to do a traditional stick build, it's going to be much harder to actually. Okay. Next question from Anastasia says, can properties with overland flow be built on if you have a high set with an open carport underneath or something like that? Brisbane Brisbane City Council in particular. So Anastasia, this is very subjective to the individual council. Okay, so but from a functionality perspective, flooding comes from 5 different sources. Okay, so there is flooding from rivers and creeks and breaking their banks. There is the tributaries that lead to the river. So you might have a creek that floods, but the river does not flood. Or you might have the river that floods, but the individual creeks, that because it might have been fed by 20 different creeks, each one of those don't individually flood, but the river itself does. Then you've got flooding that actually comes from the overland flow, which is what you're talking about here, which is the rain as it comes out of the sky, hits the ground, and it traverses across the ground in order to get to the creeks. Okay. Then you've got stormwater, and then you've got high tide type flooding or storm surge type flooding. So we're talking about the overland flow. Now, irrespective of the source of the flooding, the order of magnitude of that will be measured as I guess, the levels of probability, or what they call the annual exceedance probability, the AEP, and typically measured as a 1 in 100 year event. So what is the likelihood of this happening in 100 years? And when it does, what is the impact of that? So what is the height of the water? What is the speed of the water? How fast does it go up and how fast does it go down? When you understand all of those, then your particular council will say, well, based on the probability in this particular area and the implications of this area, then they will have a level of risk that they allocate to that. So in some areas, there is no flooding at all. So they don't have any calculations that sit with this. In other areas, there are lots of flooding and they flood very regularly. And so they might have a series of staggered rules that says, well, for a 1 in 10 year event, do this. For a 1 in 20 year event, do that. For a 1 in 50 year event, do that. So when you understand the implications of your council, Brisbane being one that floods very regularly, you need to look at the, I guess, the rules that sit there, look at the AEP statistics and go, what is the minimum, what is the likely flood level? Then look at your particular property and say, what is the height above sea level of my particular property? What is the difference between them? So if I'm at 4 meters and the water gets to 4.5, that means there's a 50 centimeter depth. Then there'll be a level of safety that sits above that. So if there's water flowing, I guess, downstream, is it going to be carrying sticks and debris and all sorts of things like that? So there'll be a safety barrier that sits above that in some instances will be 30 centimeters, some instances will be 50, some instances will be 75 centimeters. So when you understand what that is, that will give you a minimum habitable height. When you have your minimum habitable height, that is the floor level that you can actually place your dwelling. So your question was, can you do that and have a minimum habitable height? The answer is yes. I've seen that done many, many times. The height might be something that might be visually unattractive, though. So you may have to be 2 meters off the ground, for example, in order for the water to pass underneath the property. Okay, so now I think you asked specifically, I just want to see if I pick it. Could you do that with an open carport? It is possible to actually do that with an open carport and actually have your car, depending upon your council, okay, this is very clear. Sometimes you can have an open carport. Sometimes you can have your car parked in the driveway and not actually have a carport. Sometimes it actually has to be undercover, depending upon your council itself. So you need to understand your council rules with A, regards to the flooding, and B, with regards to the car parking, and then what is the difference between those in order to get you there, okay? So know that it is possible. I have seen solutions specifically in Brisbane that talk to exactly what you're talking about, where they have, in Brisbane, I've seen them not have a carport, but rather have the car parked on the driveway as the designated car parking space, and that allows the water to pass underneath the house, and that under the house is then deemed to be storage and not necessarily a car park per se, and that has been what I've seen get across the line in Brisbane. But you're going to need to engage with your architect and your town planner to actually lock that one in. Okay, lucky last question comes from Anthony. Anthony says, I have a pine tree located on the boundary roughly in the middle of my lot. My neighboring tree, The neighbouring properties don't have any trees nearby. I contacted council and they informed me that the tree is not protected, but the property does fall under a significant landscape tree overlay. So have you dealt with this question before? Would the council be open to allowing the removal of the tree if I propose to replant another tree elsewhere in the property as an alternative? Okay, so Anthony, firstly, I want to make sure that I understand what you've stated. There is a significant tree overlay, but then you've gone and contacted council and asked, is there specifically a tree that actually sits on this property that is protected? And the council has then said no. Now, that's a very, very important, I guess, distinction, because having an overlay does not automatically mean that you are excluded from the removing the tree. What it means is you have to do the check. And what you've done is do the check. You've actually called council, said, is there a significant tree? Can I remove it? And they've said, no, there is no significant tree. Now, so if you've done that check, you would have got a job number, typically your reference number for what you've actually done. I would make sure that ideally you actually get that in writing to actually say that you've got that proposal in place. And where possible, I would even get your town planner or even an arborist to actually lodge that on your behalf. Once you've got that in writing to say it's okay, then you had the overlay that says I have to check, and you did check and you got the all clear. So if that's the case, then there should be no reason why you can't remove the tree. Now, on the other hand, if you didn't ask the question correctly, and this is the distinction, if you didn't ask the question correctly, then you might not have got the correct advice from them. So I would say get your town planner to lodge that request on your behalf, stating we're aware of a significant tree overlay. Is there a protected tree on this particular site that we need to be aware of in this particular instance? And when you get the all clear from that, then you are free to remove that tree. Now, be very, very careful. Some councils, every tree is protected by default, and you must get permission every single time. In other councils, the tree is only protected where it is actually individually named or where there is an overlay, such as this particular one. So you've got the overlay and you've checked, and you've got the clearance in this instance is what it sounds like in how you've described your question. Please sanity check that with your town planner and make sure that I have interpreted that correctly. And if that is the case, mate, then you should be in a good position to move forward. That said, folks, that is the end of another Sunday session, another open mic night. So if you would like to participate in next month's open mic night, we run these on the first Sunday of every single month. Click on the links below, propdev.info/open-mic, and we would love to help you on your property development journey. In the meantime, please come to one of our events all the way around the country. We run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and we would love to see you at one of our upcoming events. Till then, folks, I'm going to say it's been a pleasure. We are now 13 years old. We've got 32,000 people in our community, and I cannot wait to help you on your property development journey as you're starting it with another 13 years to go running this community. Can't wait, folks. Till then, bye for now. Bye.